He whispered, "I love you," into the phone, and my world stopped. I was standing in the hallway, a cup of coffee in my hands, its warmth doing nothing to fight the ice that was spreading through my veins. "It wasn't my name," he said. He was in his home office, the door slightly ajar, believing I was still asleep. He spoke of a new life, a new house, a future that had been meticulously planned without me. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, but I barely registered the sound. My hands, which had been trembling, suddenly became still. They clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. But what came next wasn't sorrow, it was a terrible, clarifying calm. My mind flashed back through 15 years of sacrifice. I remembered working double shifts as a nurse so he could get his business degree, and the gut-wrenching pain of selling my late mother's wedding ring to fund his startup, the company he'd always called ours. Every bonus, every inheritance, had been funneled into that business or our joint savings, the very account he was now planning to plunder for his new life with someone else. My eyes drifted to his desk, visible through the crack in the door. I saw a familiar manila folder, the one I'd labeled myself in my neatest handwriting, "Our Forever Home." Inside were the blueprints for the house we were supposed to build on the piece of land we'd bought last year. He was taking our shared dream and giving it to her. That was the moment the ice in my chest caught fire. The tears that had threatened to fall evaporated. They were a waste of resources, and I knew I would need every ounce of strength for what was to come. I wasn't just a wife he was discarding. I was a business partner he was trying to defraud, and he had severely underestimated me. He finished his call and walked out of the office, feigning a yawn. "Morning, honey," he said, not even noticing the broken mug on the floor. He just stepped over it. He saw me standing there, silent and still, and mistook my shock for weakness. That was his first mistake. My heart was broken, yes, but my mind was already working, calculating, planning. He had drawn the battle lines. He thought he was just leaving a marriage. He had no idea he was starting a war. My first move wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a quiet trip to the bank. The numbness that had followed the shattering of the coffee cup had solidified into a cold, hard diamond of purpose. While he was still in the shower, whistling a tune for a future that didn't include me, I was already dressed and out the door. The bank manager, a kind-faced woman named Sarah who knew us both, greeted me with a warm smile. I didn't return it. My smile was gone, another casualty of his phone call. "I need to make a significant transfer," I said, my voice unnervingly steady. "All of it." Her smile faltered as she pulled up the joint accounts on her screen. The numbers glowed, representing everything I'd poured into our life together. He was planning to take it all to use our shared resources to fund his escape with her while leaving me with nothing but the ashes of our marriage. I signed the forms. My hand didn't shake. With a few clicks, a 7-figure sum ceased to be ours and became irrevocably mine. The sound of the keyboard was the first shot fired in my war. Sarah looked at me with a mixture of shock and pity. I didn't need her pity. I needed her discretion. "This is a private financial restructuring," I told her, my tone leaving no room for questions. Between us, my next stop was a sleek, glass-walled law firm in the heart of the city. I didn't want a lawyer. I wanted a strategist, a warrior. I found her in Eleanor Vance, a woman whose reputation for dismantling wealthy, deceitful men was the stuff of legend. I sat in her minimalist office, the skyline sprawling behind her, and I laid out my case not with tears, but with the cold precision of a surgeon. "I am not just a betrayed wife," I stated, my hands folded neatly on my lap. "I am a defrauded business partner. I need to know exactly how much he has already stolen from our company and how he's doing it." Eleanor didn't blink. She simply picked up her phone and said, "Get me Michael Ross, the forensic accountant, now." By lunchtime, I had the best and most ruthless team money could buy. My money. Returning home was like stepping onto a stage. The shattered mug was gone, the floor wiped clean. He was at the kitchen island, scrolling through real estate listings on his phone. Our land, our forever home, now just a commodity for his escape. He didn't look up. "Where'd you run off to, honey?" he asked, his voice dripping with a casual affection that made my skin crawl. I let my shoulders slump. I allowed a slight tremor to enter my voice. "I just needed some air. I've been feeling so down lately." It was the bait, and he took it. He finally looked up, and I saw it in his eyes, not concern, but satisfaction. He saw a sad, broken woman, too fragile to be a threat. He came over and wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting on my head. I forced myself to lean into the hug, to smell the cologne I'd bought him for our anniversary. "It's just a rough patch, sweetheart," he whispered into my hair, the same lips that had whispered "I love you" to another woman. "We'll get through it." I closed my eyes, not to block the pain, but to focus on the plan. While he held his oblivious, depressed wife, my mind was cataloging the evidence. The way he'd left his personal laptop open on the counter. The new, expensive watch on his wrist that I'd never seen before. This was my new reality. I was an actress in the play of our dying marriage, and he was the arrogant lead who had no idea the script had been rewritten. His performance of pity was my greatest weapon. He was growing careless, and his carelessness was the fuel for my revenge. The performance of a lifetime began that afternoon. I became a ghost in my own home, a pale, trembling echo of the woman he'd once claimed to love. It was a role that required everything I had, because every instinct screamed at me to claw his eyes out, to scream the truth in his face. But I swallowed the fury. I let it simmer deep inside, a hidden forge where my vengeance was being tempered. A few days after my sad air excuse, I let the first tear fall. We were watching a mindless sitcom, and during a commercial for a cruise line, the kind we'd once dreamed of, Tikingai let out a choked sob. I buried my face in my hands, my shoulders shaking. "What is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice a perfect imitation of concern. I looked up, making sure my eyes were glistening, my lower lip trembling just so. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice cracking on the lie. "I just feel like I'm losing you. We feel so far apart." He sighed, a sound of profound, manufactured patience, and pulled me into his arms. "Oh honey, you're not losing me. It's just work stress. You know how it is." His hand rubbed my back, and I focused on the feeling of his wedding ring, a cold circle of gold against my skin, a symbol of every vow he was shattering. I let him hold me, let him murmur empty platitudes into my hair. Inside, I was ice. I was stone. The bait was set, and he took it with gluttonous delight. His confidence bloomed like a poisonous flower, leading him to become increasingly careless. He started leaving his personal laptop open and unattended on the kitchen counter, its screen glowing with his secrets as he'd walk away. I didn't touch it, not yet. Patience was my weapon, and I was waiting for the perfect moment when he would be most vulnerable. The phone calls started next. He'd take them in his home office, but now he left the door wide open. He thought I was too lost in my own manufactured misery to notice. I'd be in the living room, pretending to read a book, my entire being focused on the low murmur of his voice from the other room. "I know, baby, I know," he'd coo, his tone so different from the one he used with me, lighter, freer, laced with a genuine affection that made my stomach twist. "Soon. Just a few more details to iron out. The view is going to be all yours." I'd turn a page. I wasn't reading. My knuckles white. Each word was a gift. Each careless laugh was another piece of ammunition. He was handing me the rope, strand by strand, and I was silently, patiently, weaving it into a noose. One evening, he came home with a new briefcase, sleek and expensive. "A little gift to myself," he said with a smug grin, placing it on the table. "A successful man needs the right tools, right?" I forced a watery smile. "It's beautiful." I reached out and traced the fine leather, my fingers lingering near the clasps. "You deserve it." The words tasted like ash, but they fed his ego. He preened, completely blind to the calculation in my eyes. He started talking about the future again, but it was a hollow, generic future. "Things will be better soon. You'll see," he'd say, his gaze already drifting past me, toward the life he was building with her. He was managing me, a problem to be soothed and placated until he could make his clean escape. He saw a sad wife, a weepy, fragile creature who was barely holding on. What he didn't see was the architect of his ruin meticulously documenting every piece of evidence, at times of his clandestine calls, the expensive jewelry he bought for her, the business expenses that were clearly personal. I was building a case so airtight it would obliterate him. My tears were a weapon. My perceived weakness was my greatest strength. While he was busy comforting his broken little wife, I was building a case so airtight, so damning, that it would obliterate him. The rope was almost long enough. Soon, it would be time to pull it tight. His overconfidence became his undoing. It was a Tuesday. He was in his study, the door confidently ajar, and I was in the kitchen. pretending to be absorbed in the mundane task of loading the dishwasher. The sound of his voice, low and conspiratorial, carried into the hall. I moved like a ghost, my phone already in my hand, its record function a single tap away. I pressed my back against the wall just outside the door, the cool plaster, a stark contrast to the fire in my veins. He was on speakerphone, his tone dripping with a smugness that made my stomach clench. "Relax, it's all taken care of," he said, and I could picture him leaning back in his leather chair, the one I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. "The funds are moved, the shell is airtight. Serenity Holdings doesn't lead back to me, not in any way that matters. Serenity," he'd named his secret life, his betrayal, Serenity. The irony was a physical blow. A nasally voice on the other end, his lawyer, no doubt said something about risk, about due diligence. My husband laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "Due diligence. She's a nurse, for Christ's sake. She thinks a balanced portfolio means not spending too much at the grocery store. She has no idea how any of this works. By the time she figures out the joint account is dry, I'll be free and clear. Free and clear. With the business, with the new house, with her." My thumb hovered over the stop button, but I held my breath. I needed more. I needed the confession, the entire blueprint of his treachery. "And the down payment?" the lawyer asked. "Transferred this morning from the company's operational fund, marked as a consultant fee. It's a beautiful place, right on the water, just like we always talked about." He said the last part with a wistful sigh that had once been reserved for our dreams, for the plans we'd sketched on napkins and the land we'd picked out together. Now, he was giving our future away to a stranger. I felt the cold finality of it all. This wasn't a spontaneous affair. It was a corporate takeover of our life. He was the CEO, and I was a subsidiary. He was liquidating. "A few more months," my husband continued, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "Just gotta keep playing the part at home. It's tedious, but it's almost over. She's so fragile lately, cries all the time. It's exhausting." The recording was still running. Every word was a nail in his coffin. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was mocking my pain, dismissing my grief as a tedious inconvenience. The man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, was a hollowed-out shell, filled with nothing but greed and deceit. I heard the creak of his chair. The call was ending. "Yeah, talk tomorrow." The line went dead. I slipped away, silent as a shadow, back into the kitchen. I stopped the recording. The icon glowed on my screen, a digital file of his ruin. I saved it, then saved 2 more copies, sending one to a secure cloud drive my lawyer had set up. I documented the date, the time, the participants. I was no longer just a betrayed wife. I was a forensic archivist of my own marriage's murder. He walked out of the study a moment later, stretching. He saw me at the sink and came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. I forced my body to relax into the familiar, hated embrace. "Everything okay, honey?" he asked, his voice dripping with a false concern that made my skin crawl. I looked at our reflection in the dark window. I saw his satisfied smile. I saw my own face, a mask of placid calm, but beneath the surface, my eyes were no longer sad. They were sharp, focused, victorious. "Everything is perfect," I whispered, my voice steady. I was just thinking about the future. He squeezed me tighter, completely misreading the steel in my tone. "Our future is going to be amazing, I promise." Oh, I knew it would be, just not the one he was imagining. He had handed me the final piece of evidence, the smoking gun, on a silver platter. His every word, his laugh, his contempt, it was all mine now. The noose was woven, and it was finally, beautifully, ready. Now it was time to spring the trap. The recording of his call was a cold, hard weight in my pocket, the final piece of evidence I needed. I had nurtured his carelessness with my feigned tears, and now his overconfidence had given me everything required to destroy him completely. I waited for the perfect moment. A quiet Tuesday evening, he was scrolling through real estate listings on his phone, a faint, smug smile on his lips. I took a steadying breath, not of anxiety, but of focus. The performance of a lifetime was about to begin. "Darling," I said, my voice soft, deliberately fragile. I let my hands tremble slightly as I wrung a dishcloth. "I got some news today." He didn't look up from his phone. It's my Aunt Celia, passed away." I injected a convincing crack into the last 2 words. That got his attention. His head snapped up, the realtor's website forgotten. His eyes, however, didn't hold sympathy. They held the sharp, calculating gleam of a predator catching a new scent. "Aunt Celia," I didn't know you were close. We weren't, I admitted, looking down as if ashamed, but it seems she remembered me in her will. Her lawyer called. It's not a fortune, but it's something. $100,000. The number hung in the air between us, shimmering. I watched his brain work, the gears turning behind his eyes. $100,000. Not enough to raise major red flags, but more than enough to be a tantalizing infusion of cash. He was already mentally spending it. I could tell. A down payment on a car for her, perhaps a luxury vacation to break in the new house. He was at my side in an instant, his arms around me, the picture of the supportive husband. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry for your loss. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. He held me for a moment, a hollow pantomime of comfort, before getting to the real point. So, what will you do with the money? A savings account. It'll just sit there, losing value to inflation. I looked up at him, widening my eyes with a mix of grief and manufactured devotion. I was thinking about the company. I know you've been stressed about cash flow lately. I want to invest it. All of it. I want to show my support for you. For us. The triumph that flashed across his face was so naked, so vile, it took every ounce of my willpower not to recoil. He saw my grief as a windfall, my loyalty as a weapon to be used against me. He was so blinded by his own greed that he didn't question the convenience of this dying ant he'd never heard of. He didn't see the trap because he was too busy admiring the bait. That's an incredible idea, he said, his voice thick with false emotion. He cupped my face. You have no idea what this means to me, to the business. I just want to help secure our future, I whispered, leaning into his touch, playing the fool so perfectly. This calls for a proper strategy, he declared, already slipping into his CEO persona. We should call an emergency board meeting. Present this as a show of faith from the family. It'll project strength, stability. He was already crafting the narrative, one where he was the brilliant leader, and I was the dutiful, funding wife. An emergency meeting. I feigned hesitation. Is that really necessary? It's just my little inheritance. It's a powerful symbol, he insisted, his mind racing. We'll have my father and the others there. It's the perfect opportunity. He didn't know how right he was. It was the perfect opportunity for me. I let him believe it was his idea. I let him make the calls, his voice booming with renewed confidence. He scheduled the meeting for Friday morning. As he spoke to the board secretary, he winked at me. A gesture that was meant to be conspiratorial but felt like a nail in his own coffin. I simply nodded, a small, sad smile on my lips. He was building the stage for his own execution, and he was proud of the craftsmanship. Every word he spoke, every eager agreement, was another brick in the wall that would soon entomb him. The noose wasn't just woven. He was lovingly polishing the wood for the gallows. The morning of the board meeting, I was already dressed and sipping coffee in the kitchen when he stumbled out of the bedroom. He looked like he hadn't slept, his face a pale, crumpled map of anxiety. I, on the other hand, had slept better than I had in years. The calm that had settled in my chest the day I first heard his betrayal had solidified into a core of polished steel. Nervous about the meeting? I asked, my voice light and innocent. I pushed a cup of coffee toward him. He flinched, grabbing the mug like it was a lifeline. Just a lot on my mind. Big day. He couldn't even look at me. The empty accounts were a ghost haunting the space between us. A phantom limb of his stolen future that he couldn't acknowledge. He was a man trying to hold the fortress together while the foundation had already been done. It is a big day, I agreed, a gentle smile playing on my lips. A new chapter for the company. For us. He finally met my eyes, and I saw a flicker of his old arrogance. He still thought he was the puppet master. He saw my calm demeanor as simple, wifely devotion. He had no idea that the puppet had not only cut her own strings but was now holding the scissors to his. We drove to the office in silence. The air in the car was thick with his unsaid panic and my quiet anticipation. He kept checking his phone, his thumb hovering over her number. I was sure, but he didn't dare call. Not with me sitting right there. Every jerk of his knee, every tense sigh, was a symphony to me. When we walked into the sleek, modern lobby of the company I helped build, he instinctively straightened his tie and put on his CEO mask. Employees nodded respectfully. Good morning, Mr. Thorne. He would give a tight, professional smile. They would then look at me, the quiet wife, and offer a softer morning, Evelyn. They had no idea they were witnessing the final act. He headed straight for the boardroom to prepare. I lingered, telling him I needed a moment to collect my thoughts. I watched him disappear behind the heavy oak doors, a lamb walking blithely into the slaughterhouse. I didn't go to the restroom to collect myself. I went to the empty office, adjacent to the boardroom where my lawyer, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Clara, was waiting. She didn't smile. She simply handed me a thin, cold folder. It wasn't thick with lies and hidden transactions. It was lean, containing only the fatal truths. "It's all here," she said, her voice low and steady. "The bank statements are on a secure drive, ready to be displayed. The recording is cued. His father has been prepped, discreetly. He's furious, but he'll follow the script to save the company." I took the folder. It felt weightless, yet it contained the sum total of my husband's destruction, and the assistant's evidence, integrated and verified. The USB drive was the key that locked every door behind him. I nodded, a strange serenity washing over me. This was it. 15 years of my life, of my sweat and sacrifice, had led to this single, silent moment in a borrowed office. I heard the low murmur of voices from the boardroom. They were all in there. His father, the other directors, the men who had always seen me as an accessory to his ambition, and him, sitting at the head of the table, believing he was about to receive a tribute. I took a deep breath. The scent of expensive coffee and polished wood filled my lungs. This was the air of my victory. "Ready?" Clara asked. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of a monitor. My eyes were clear, my posture unwavering. The heartbroken woman from the hallway was gone. In her place stood a shareholder, a partner, an executioner. "I've been ready for a long time," I said, and I turned to walk into the room. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. All eyes turned to me. My husband was at the head of the long, mahogany table. A PowerPoint slide titled "Future Growth and Stability" displayed on the screen behind him. He gave me that weak, condescending smile I had come to know so well. It was the smile of a man who thought he was still in control. He began to speak. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you know, we're here to discuss a significant, family-backed capital infusion that will—" I didn't sit in the empty chair he had gestured to beside him. I remained standing at the foot of the table, directly opposite him. I placed the thin folder on the polished wood. "That's not why we're here, David," I said, my voice cutting through his corporate spiel, clear and cold as ice. The room went utterly still. His smile faltered. "Evelyn, honey, let me handle this." "My name," I said, locking eyes with him, "is not Honey. It's on the founding documents of this company. It's on the deeds of the assets you tried to steal." I saw the first flicker of real fear in his eyes. The puppet was talking back, and she had a very, very sharp pair of scissors. The night before the meeting, the doorbell chimed, a soft, intrusive sound in the tense quiet of my planning. I wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, I saw Sarah, my husband's executive assistant for over a decade. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, and she clutched a small, metallic object in her hand like a lifeline. I opened the door, my guard up. "Sarah, I'm so sorry to bother you, Evelyn," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her usual professional composure completely shattered. "He fired me today." I just stared, my mind racing. "Fired you? Why?" A bitter, choked laugh escaped her. "To give my job to her, to Amanda." She spat the name like it was poison. "He said he needed someone with a fresh perspective for the new direction of the company. He gave me 1 month's severance and told me to clear my desk." Her hands were trembling. "After 12 years, I was there when he couldn't afford to pay me on time. I covered for him 1,000 times. I led her to the kitchen, my heart hammering a new, furious rhythm. This was an unforeseen variable, a dangerous one. I poured her a glass of water, my movements slow and deliberate, betraying none of the storm inside me. "He thinks I don't know," she continued, her gaze fixed on the water glass. "He thinks I'm just a stupid, loyal secretary. But I've seen the emails. I've booked the hotel rooms. I've watched him lie to you for years, and it's been eating me alive." She finally looked up at me, her eyes pleading for understanding, for absolution. "You've always been so kind to me. You remembered my son's birthday every year." He never did. Then, she placed the USB drive on the counter between us. It was a simple, silver stick, but it felt heavier than lead. "What is this, Sarah?" I asked, though a part of me already knew. "Everything," she breathed. "It's a backup of his private server, the one he thinks is so clever, hidden behind a dummy corporate account. It has every incriminating email he's ever sent to her, to his lawyer, to the offshore bank." Every fraudulent expense report where he charged his mistress's shopping sprees to the company. Every secret contract for the shell corporation he calls Horizon Holdings. The blueprints for the house. The transfer receipts. It's all there. I picked up the drive. It was cool against my palm. This was it. The final, missing piece. The keystone that would lock the entire arch of his destruction into place. With this, the case wasn't just strong, it was annihilating. He told me I was disposable, Sarah said, a fresh tear tracing a path down her cheek. He said I wouldn't be a part of his legacy. I reached out and covered her hand with mine. Her skin was cold. You will be, I said, my voice low and certain. Your legacy will be helping to ensure he doesn't have one. I walked her to the door, my mind already partitioning the new data, slotting it into the intricate plan. As she left, she turned back one last time. Don't let him get away with it, Evelyn, for all of us. The moment the door clicked shut, the calm in me solidified into something unbreakable. I went straight to my home office, where my lawyer, Clara, was waiting on a video call, and the forensic accountant, Mark, was surrounded by spreadsheets. We have something, I said, holding up the drive. We worked through the night, a silent, efficient team fueled by cold fury and expensive coffee. The contents of the drive were a breathtaking catalog of betrayal. We found the email where he instructed his mistress to use a fake name for the utility bills at the new house. We found the scanned copies of checks drawn from our company's operating account, made out to Horizon Holdings for consulting fees. We found the romantic, nauseating emails where he promised her our life, our dream, down to the last detail. Mark cross-referenced each transaction, his fingers flying across the keyboard. This is it, he muttered, a grim smile on his face. This is the direct line. Marital assets to the Shell Corporation, to the property. It's a perfect map of his fraud. Clara looked at me, her professional demeanor cracked by a spark of pure, vicious satisfaction. With this, we don't just have him by the throat. We have his entire skeleton. We can prove criminal intent, not just marital misconduct. The board will have no choice. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky, the puzzle was complete. Every piece was in place, locked down by evidence, so overwhelming it was almost beautiful in its cruelty. Sarah, the woman he had so carelessly discarded, had handed me the sword, and tomorrow, in that boardroom, I would not just cut the strings, I would sever the head of the puppet master himself. That night, I didn't sleep. Sleep was for the innocent, for those whose worlds weren't built on a foundation of lies. I sat at my desk, the stark light of the lamp illuminating a battlefield of paper and pixels. On one side, my lawyer, Clara, her image sharp on the video call, a general ready for the final assault. On the other, Mark, the forensic accountant, surrounded by spreadsheets that told a story of theft, his fingers a constant, furious flutter over his keyboard. The USB drive was the Rosetta Stone to my husband's treachery. We plugged it in, and a breathtaking catalog of betrayal unfolded. It wasn't just the big things, like the emails directing company funds to the shell corporation he'd named Horizon Holdings. It was the small, intimate cruelties that sealed his fate. An email to his mistress, detailing the exact shade of blue for the kitchen cabinets, the same shade I'd painstakingly chosen from a dozen samples for our forever home. A scanned check, drawn from our company's operating account, for a consulting fee that perfectly matched the down payment on her new car. He wasn't just stealing our money. He was gifting her our life, our inside jokes, our shared dreams, down to the last detail. This is it, Mark muttered, his voice a low thrum of vindication. He had created a digital map, a flowchart of fraud so clear a child could understand it. See this transfer from the joint marital account to the company's slush fund, and then this immediate payment to Horizon. It's a direct pipeline. He was using marital assets. You legally own half of to fund a separate entity to hide assets. That's not just a divorce no, that's criminal embezzlement. Clara leaned into her camera, her eyes glinting. With this, we don't just have him by the throat. We have his entire skeleton. The board will have no choice but to act. They'll be facing shareholder lawsuits and criminal investigations if they don't. The plan evolved, shifting from a defensive maneuver to a scorched earth campaign. It was no longer about winning a favorable divorce settlement. It was about reclamation. I was taking back the empire I had helped build from the ground up. The empire whose foundations were mixed with the dust of my mother's wedding ring. We worked through the night, a silent, efficient team fueled by cold fury and expensive coffee. I narrated the story of our life, giving context to the numbers. That bonus he used for the marketing retreat in the Bahamas, I said, my voice steady as stone. I worked 80-hour weeks for 3 months as a nurse to cover our bills so he could have that capital. That's not company money. That's my blood, my sweat, transferred into a corporate account and then stolen. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky a soft, innocent pink, the puzzle was complete. Every piece was in place, locked down by evidence so overwhelming it was almost beautiful in its cruelty. We had printed copies of the most damning emails, screenshots of the illicit transfers, and a transcript of the recorded phone call, all neatly collated into 3 black binders. Clara's final words before we signed off were simple. Get some rest, Evelyn. You have a company to take back tomorrow. But rest was impossible. I sat in the quiet of my home office, the same room where he had whispered his lies into the phone. The ice that had formed in my veins that day had now been forged into a weapon. Sarah, the woman he had so carelessly discarded, had handed me the sword, and tomorrow, in that boardroom, I would not just cut his strings. I would sever the head of the puppet master himself and take the stage for myself. The oblivious, heartbroken wife was a costume I had worn for the last time. Tomorrow, the widow of his old life would be born. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and polished mahogany. David was already there, perched at the head of the table like a king on a throne he'd built with stolen bricks. He looked stressed, a fine sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool temperature. I took my usual seat to his right. The chair felt different now. It was no longer a place of support, but a command post. He glanced at me, and his eyes flickered with a familiar, condescending pity. He gave me a weak, patronizing smile. Poor, fragile Evelyn, he was thinking, still so lost. He had no idea I wasn't there as his wife, his emotional crutch, the woman he was so certain he had broken. I was there as his executioner. My heart wasn't racing. It was a steady, cold drumbeat in my chest. The ice from that first day had crystallized into a perfect, unshakable focus. I met his gaze and offered a small, tremulous smile of my own, the final performance of the sad little wife. It was the last lie I would ever tell him. The heavy door swung open precisely on time. My lawyer, Clara, walked in, her heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the hardwood floor. She was a vision of tailored severity in a black suit, a stark contrast to the room's sea of uncertain gray. She didn't look at anyone but Mark. The room fell silent, all the murmured conversations dying instantly. The board members looked confused. Mark looked annoyed. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice dripping with faux authority. "We're about to begin a private board meeting. That's precisely why I'm here." "Mr. Evans," Clara said, her voice cool and clear as glass. She stopped directly beside his chair and placed a single, thick envelope on the polished table in front of him. It looked innocuous, beige and legal, but everyone in the room could feel its weight. "Consider yourself served." The color drained from Mark's face so completely, it was as if someone had pulled a plug. His jaw went slack. He stared at the envelope like it was a venomous snake. "What is the meaning of this, Evelyn?" he hissed, his voice a low, strangled thing meant only for me. I didn't answer. I simply watched him. I watched his father's face morph from confusion to dawning horror. I watched the other board members shift uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between me, Mark, and the damning envelope. "This is a private matter," Mark sputtered, trying to regain control, his hand slapping down on the envelope as if to hide it. "This has no place in a board meeting." "Security, on the contrary," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, calm and steady. It was the first time I had spoken, and every head swiveled toward me. "This has everything to do with this meeting. You see, the petition for divorce is just the opening act. It outlines, in brief, the grounds, but what comes next is a detailed report on how you have been systematically looting the company your father helped you build. The company we built." I nodded to Clara, who moved to the AV console. Mark's eyes were wide with panic now, a trapped animal finally seeing the bars of its cage. "Evelyn, stop this madness. We can talk about this at home," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air, poisoned and hollow. "You mean the one you emptied our joint accounts to buy for your mistress? Or the one whose blueprints you stole from our shared dream?" I turned my gaze to the large screen on the wall as it flickered to life. "No, Mark, we're well past talking. The first slide was a blown-up image of a bank statement for the Shell Corporation, Serenity Holdings. The second was a copy of the check, drawn from our company's primary operating account, made out to Serenity for the down payment on the new house. A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed around the table. "This is a lie," Mark shouted, half freezing from his chair. "These are forgeries. She's unstable, grieving her aunt." "My aunt is perfectly healthy. Thank you for your concern," I said, my tone glacial. "But your mistress's new home, that investment is about to become very, very unhealthy." I looked at his father, whose face was a mask of stricken disbelief. "I'm so sorry you have to see this, Robert, but you need to know what your son has become." Then I played the recording. His voice, slick with deceit and a twisted sort of pride, filled the silent, horrified room. "Don't worry, baby. The money's safe. I set up a shell corporation she can't touch. A few more months, and I'll be free and clear. The business, the new house, our new life, it's all ours." There was a beat of perfect, absolute silence. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of his world shattering. The performance was over. The execution had begun. His face went pale, a sickly gray, that was beautiful to witness. Before he could form a single, pathetic lie, I began my presentation. I didn't show them sales projections or marketing plans. I showed them his soul, and it was rotten. The first click of my remote brought up his secret bank statements for Ethelred Holdings on the massive screen. The numbers glowed, a damning testament to his greed. "As you can see," I said, my voice cool and steady, a stark contrast to the tremor I saw in his hands over the past 8 months. "Several large transfers have been siphoned from our primary corporate accounts. The total, as of yesterday, is $2,450,000. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I didn't look at them. My eyes were locked on Mark. These funds were not reinvested. They were not used for operational expenses. They were used. I paused, clicking to the next slide, a copy of the cashier's check for the down payment on the new house, to purchase a 4-bedroom waterfront property in the Cove, a property currently under contract to one Miss Chloe Roberts. Mark shot to his feet, his chair screeching behind him. "This is a lie. These are forgeries. She's unstable," he sputtered, his eyes wild, pleading with his father. "She's been grieving her aunt. She's not in her right mind." "My aunt is perfectly healthy. Thank you for your concern," I replied, my tone flat, devoid of all emotion. "It was a scalpel, not a bludgeon. But your mistress's new home, that investment is about to become very, very unhealthy." I turned my gaze to Robert, his father, the man who had welcomed me into his family. His face was a horrifying shade of purple, his hand clutching his chest. "I'm so sorry you have to see this, Robert, but you need to know what your son has become." Then, I played the recording. The click of the button was the loudest sound in the room, and then his voice, slick with deceit and a twisted sort of pride, filled the silent, horrified space. "Don't worry, baby. The money's safe. I set up a shell corporation she can't touch. A few more months, and I'll be free and clear. The business, the new house, our new life, it's all ours." There was a beat of perfect, absolute silence. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of his world shattering. Then, chaos. Robert slammed his fist on the table. "You stupid boy. You've destroyed everything I built for you." Mark was stammering, his eyes darting from his father's rage to the stony faces of the other board members. "It's not what it sounds like. She manipulated the audio. I cut him off, my voice cutting through the noise like a whip. "The evidence is irrefutable, Mark. It's all here. The emails you sent from your company laptop, detailing the fraudulent invoices. The expense reports where you claimed client dinners with Chloe that were, in fact, romantic getaways." I clicked through each document, a relentless, methodical march to the gallows. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed every person in this room. You embezzled from the company your father started. You committed fraud against the very board that trusted you." I let that hang in the air, a thick, poisonous cloud. I saw the exact moment the board members shifted from shocked spectators to furious allies. Their money was on the line, their reputations. He wasn't just a cheating husband anymore. He was a liability. "That's not all," I said. "My final move." My lawyer, a stoic pillar of a man named Mr. Sterling, stepped forward and placed a single sheet of paper in front of Mark. As of this moment, your access to all company accounts, assets, and properties is revoked, pending a full forensic audit. Of course. Mark looked down at the paper, then back at me. The performance was over. The execution was complete. The public humiliation was absolute. He was no longer the powerful CEO. He was a thief caught in the spotlight. His every sin laid bare for the people whose respect he craved most. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. There was nothing left to say. The trap had sprung, and he was squarely in its jaws. The checkmate moment was when Clara placed a single, deliberate hand on the conference table. The room, already thick with the stench of David's lies, fell into a dead silence. She explained, in a voice of pure, unshakable legal granite, that because he had used marital assets SOA company, funded with my sweat and my mother's wedding ring to commit his fraud, all assets purchased through his shell corporation were legally mine, including the property at 1242 Willow Creek Lane, Sterling said, his eyes locking with Mark's. The so-called love nest. I watched the words land, one by one, like hammer blows. The new house, the future he had whispered about on the phone. The foundation of his escape pit was now the cornerstone of his ruin. It was mine. Mark's father, Arthur, a man who had always treated me like the daughter he never had, made a sound halfway between a sob and a growl. He pushed back from the table, his chair screeching in protest. He looked at his son not with paternal disappointment, but with the cold fury of a businessman who had just seen his life's work threatened by a reckless, greedy child. "You stupid, stupid boy," Arthur whispered, the words carrying more weight than any shout. He turned to the rest of the board, his face a mask of grim resolution. "I make a motion to remove Mark from his position as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." The ayes came in a swift, unanimous chorus. There was no discussion. No debate. They were rats fleeing a sinking ship, and Mark was the one who had drilled the holes. I saw the calculation in their eyes. I had the evidence, I had the money, and I had the law on my side. Backing me was the only way to salvage their investment. Furthermore, Arthur continued, his voice gaining strength, I move that we install Eleanor as interim CEO to steer the company through this crisis. That vote was even faster. My husband, the man who had stepped over my shattered coffee mug, was now nothing. A nonentity in the room he had once commanded. The door opened, and two security guards, men I had personally vetted and who knew me well, entered. They didn't look at Mark, they looked at me. I gave a single, slight nod. "Mr. Covington," the senior guard said, his tone respectful but firm, "you need to come with us." Mark finally found his voice. "You can't do this, Dad. This is my company." "It was our company," I corrected him, my voice quiet but clear in the hushed room. "You built your new future on top of it. Now, the foundation is yours to lie in." As the guards approached, he became frantic, his eyes wild. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "She set me up. This is all her. She's a psychotic bitch." His father turned his back, staring out the window at the city skyline we had built that company to reach. The other board members looked down at their hands, at their papers, anywhere but at the spectacle of his unraveling. The guards each took one of his arms. He struggled for a moment, a pathetic, writhing thing, but they were strong and resolute. They guided him, not roughly but with an undeniable finality, toward the door. He kept shouting, a stream of curses and pleas that faded as they pulled him into the hallway. The last thing I saw was the back of his tailored suit jacket, the same one I'd picked out for him for this very meeting. As he was led away, the door clicked shut, severing the last thread. The silence he left behind was absolute. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Arthur finally turned from the window. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his jaw was set. He walked over to me, placed a hand on my shoulder, and squeezed. It was an apology, a benediction, and a transfer of power, all in one. "The board stands with you, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick. "We will recover from this." "The board stands with you, Evelyn," Arthur said, his voice thick. "We will recover from this." I looked around the table, meeting the gaze of each stunned director. The shock was fading, replaced by a wary, newfound respect. They had seen the evidence. They had seen the steel in my spine. They had seen their CEO. I took a slow, deep breath, the first one that felt truly free in 15 years. "Good," I said, my voice steady. The ghost of a betrayed wife finally banished from the room. "Then let's get to work. Our first order of business is a full forensic audit. I want every cent accounted for." I allowed a cold, sharp smile to touch my lips. "It's time to clean house." His fall was swift and total. The words echoed in the silence of my new office, a clean, modern space that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The news of his implosion came to me in sterile, satisfying emails from my lawyer. His assets were frozen. His reputation was a smoking crater. The mistress, the great love for whom he had torched our life, lasted a week. One single week after the boardroom disaster, she drained the secret account he'd managed to hide, a paltry sum compared to what he'd lost and vanished. The poetic justice was so perfect, it almost hurt. He was buried in legal fees he couldn't pay. My lawyer, a shark in a Savile Row suit, made sure of it. Every motion, every filing, was a brick in the wall sealing his tomb. He lost his job, his money, his fiancée, and the respect of his own family in the span of 24 hours. Arthur, his own father, had been the one to change the locks on the company's executive suite. He had tried to take everything from me, and in the end, he was the one left with absolutely nothing. I watched his destitution from a distance, a curator observing a failed exhibit. I heard through the grapevine, mostly his former, now fiercely loyal, assistant, that he was living in a Pebbideweek motel on the outskirts of the city, the same city whose skyline I now looked down upon from my apartment. The irony was a vintage I savored. He called me, of course, the first time. His voice was a ragged mix of fury and disbelief. He called me a bitch, a schemer, a heartless monster. I let him rant, the phone resting lightly against my ear as I signed paperwork to dissolve the shell corporation he'd created. His anger was fuel. It warmed the home he'd tried to leave me homeless in. The second time he called, his tone had shifted. The fire was gone, replaced by a wheedling, pathetic desperation. He was being evicted from the motel. His car had been repossessed. He was eating canned soup for every meal. He asked if I could just, maybe, unfreeze one of the smaller accounts. For old time's sake, the nickname, once a term of endearment, now felt like a slog on my skin. I told him I'd have my lawyer look into it. I never did. The final call came from a payphone. I could hear the traffic roaring behind him, the coins clinking as he fed them into the slot. His voice was broken, a hollowed-out shell of the confident man who had whispered lies into his phone. He said he'd made a terrible mistake. He said he was sorry. He begged for a small loan, just enough to get a bus ticket out of the state and start over somewhere new. I listened to his weeping, the raw, ugly sounds of a man who had finally hit the bedrock of his own consequences. I searched for any feeling inside me, a flicker of pity, a spark of residual love, even the cold embers of hatred. There was nothing, just a vast, quiet emptiness. He was no longer my husband, my betrayer, or my enemy. He was a problem that had already been solved. "Goodbye," I said, my voice calm and final, like a judge's gavel. I hung up the phone. The click was a period at the end of a 15-year sentence. I turned back to the blueprints spread across my desk, not the ones for our forever home, which I'd burned in a metal trash can the day after the board meeting. These were for the complete redesign of the company's headquarters. I was gutting his old office, tearing down the walls, turning it into a bright, open collaborative space for the new team I was building. His loyal assistant was now my VP of operations. She was brilliant, efficient, and understood the value of loyalty. The company was healing, the forensic audit was complete, and we were already seeing an uptick in investor confidence. I had rebranded it, stripping it of the name he'd chosen, and giving it my own. It was no longer his legacy. It was mine. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city glittered below, a kingdom he had tried to steal but that I had won. He had nothing, but I had everything I had ever built with my own two hands, finally returned to its rightful owner. The silence in my apartment was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was the sound of peace. It was the sound of a war well won, and it was mine, all mine. The next 6 months were a symphony of controlled demolition and meticulous rebuilding. The first thing to go was the company name, a monument to his ego. I had the sign taken down in the middle of the night. When employees arrived the next morning, they were greeted by a new, sleek logo and a new name, Aegis Solutions, a shield, a protector. His old office, that mahogany-paneled shrine to his own perceived genius, was the next to fall. I didn't just redecorate, I gutted it. I stood in the doorway, watching as workers tore down the walls with crowbars, letting the dust and debris fill the space where he had plotted my ruin. The sound was cathartic, the crash of drywall and splintering wood, a physical manifestation of his collapse. In its place, we built a bright, open, collaborative space, a hub of light and ideas where his dark, secretive corner used to be. I promoted Sarah, his former assistant, to vice president of operations. The look on her face when I offered her the position, a mixture of vindication and fierce loyalty, was worth more than any bonus. She was the one who had handed me the final key to his destruction, and now she became the architect of our rebirth. Together, we purged the last of his sycophants and promoted based on merit, not on a talent for morale, which had been strangled by his paranoia and favoritism, soared. The forensic audit was a brutal but necessary public cleansing. And once the bad blood was purged, investor confidence didn't just return, it exploded. We were leaner, cleaner, and hungrier than ever. The money followed. The seven-figure sum I'd rescued from our joint account was just the seed. With the company thriving under my leadership, my personal wealth grew into something formidable, something entirely my own. One sunny afternoon, I drove out to the piece of land that was supposed to be our forever home. The for sale sign was already staked into the earth. I didn't feel a pang of sadness as I looked at the empty plot, just a cool detachment. That dream was a shackle. Selling it felt like shedding a heavy, ill-fitting skin. The proceeds were substantial, a final, ironic payout from the dream he had tried to steal. I used every penny of it as a down payment on a stunning penthouse apartment downtown. I didn't consult anyone. I chose it for the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, almost arrogant view of the entire city. At night, it looked like a carpet of diamonds laid out at my feet. I furnished it sparsely, with clean lines and quiet colors. There were no ghosts in this space, no memories hiding in the corners. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art, was chosen by me, for me. The silence here was different. It wasn't the hollow, aching silence of a home waiting for someone who would never return. It was a rich, profound quiet, the sound of my own thoughts, my own peace. I would stand at those windows for hours, a glass of wine in my hand, and just breathe. The frantic, calculating energy that had fueled my war for months slowly dissipated, leaving in its wake a steady, humming calm. I started sleeping through the night. I started reading books again, not business reports. I rediscovered the taste of food, the simple pleasure of a morning run along the river without a single thought of him. The peace I found was the most valuable asset I acquired. It wasn't the absence of conflict, but the profound knowledge that I was whole, and complete, and powerful, entirely on my own. He had tried to reduce me to a weeping, discarded wife. Instead, he had forged me into a CEO, a sovereign of my own life. The city glittered below, a kingdom he had glimpsed but could never conquer. I had not only won it, I had built a throne at its very center, and the view was all mine. The phone in my penthouse, a sleek, black obelisk on the counter, rang with a number I didn't recognize. A part of me, the old me, might have ignored it, but the new me, the one who had conquered her own kingdom, felt a cold flicker of curiosity. I answered, saying nothing. The silence on the other end was broken by a ragged breath. Then, his voice. It's me. It was a voice from a past life, thin and frayed, stripped of all the confidence and condescending warmth that had once defined it. It was the sound of a man who had been ground into dust. I said nothing, letting the weight of my silence press down on him. I need help, he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. Just a small loan, anything. You have no idea what it's like out here. I walked to my floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawling beneath me like a conquered empire. I watched the tiny lights of cars crawl through the streets, the same streets he was probably calling from. A payphone, I guessed. The irony was almost too perfect. I made a mistake, he whispered, and the plea in his voice was so raw it was almost physical. A terrible, terrible mistake. I was a fool. I lost everything. You didn't lose it, I thought, my gaze steady on the glittering horizon. Asterisk, I took it. There's a difference. Asterisk, he started to cry, a weak, sniffling sound. I think about you every day. What we had, what I threw away. I'm so sorry. Please. Just enough to get a room for a week, to get back on my feet. I could have spoken then. I could have unleashed the torrent of evidence I had, recited the list of his crimes, detailed the exact moment his father's face crumpled in the boardroom. I could have told him about the mistress who fled the moment his bank accounts were frozen, or the fact that his own shadow probably flinched away from him now. I could have painted a masterpiece of his misery with my words, but I didn't. There was no heat in my veins, no satisfying surge of vengeance. That fire had burned out months ago, leaving behind this cool, unshakable granite. His pathetic whimpers weren't the climax of my revenge. They were the final, insignificant piece of debris settling after the explosion. He was an echo, and I had stopped listening to ghosts. He was begging for a loan, but what he was really asking for was a pardon, an acknowledgement that his suffering mattered to me, that his existence still registered on my emotional scale. He wanted to be a villain in my story, or at least a tragic figure, but he was neither. He was a footnote. I finally moved, bringing the receiver closer to my lips. He must have heard the shift, because his pleading stopped, replaced by a desperate, hopeful silence. He was waiting for my judgment, my mercy, my anger, anything that would prove he still had power over me. I gave him nothing. "Goodbye," I said. My voice was calm, flat, and utterly final. It wasn't a word spat in hatred or whispered in pity. It was a simple statement of fact, as indisputable as the sunrise over the skyline I now owned. It was the sound of a door closing, a file being sealed, a chapter ending. I hung up the phone. The soft click was deafening in the profound quiet of my home. I turned back to the window, my reflection a faint, strong outline against the tapestry of lights. I felt nothing. Not the hollow ache of our dead marriage, not the fiery triumph of my victory, just a deep, resonant peace. The war was over. Every battle had been fought, every strategy executed. His call was not a new skirmish. It was the white flag I had already collected and discarded. I never looked back. Not at the phone, not at the memory of his broken voice, not at the ruins of the life we'd shared. Why would I? Everything that mattered was right in front of me. The past was a country I had irrevocably left, and he was its destitute, forgotten king, forever exiled from the throne I had built from its ashes. I picked up my glass of wine, took a slow sip, and drank in the silent, glorious view of my future. It was, and would always be, all mine. I learned that the best revenge isn't loud and explosive. It's quiet, intelligent, and final. It's the sound of a lock clicking shut on a door he can never open again. I took the life he tried to steal from me and built it into something better, something that was mine alone. I didn't just survive. I was reborn, forged in the fire of his betrayal into something harder, sharper, and infinitely more resilient. My first act of true freedom was to sell that cursed piece of land. The proceeds didn't just buy my penthouse. They allowed me to focus entirely on leading Aegis Solutions while starting Phoenix Strategies, a consulting firm that specialized in helping women facing financial manipulation in their relationships. My days are no longer filled with the quiet anxiety of a failing marriage, but with the purposeful hum of a thriving enterprise. My apartment is a sanctuary of clean lines and calm, a direct repudiation of the cluttered, traditional home he always wanted. There are no photos of us, no mementos of a shared past. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art, was chosen by me, for me. The view from my floor-to-ceiling windows is a constant reminder. This is the kingdom I built from the rubble he left. People ask me, sometimes with pity in their voices, if I'm lonely. They don't understand. Loneliness is sitting next to someone for 15 years and feeling a million miles away. Loneliness is hearing "I love you" and knowing it's a lie. What I have now isn't loneliness. It's solitude. It's peace. It's the profound satisfaction of looking at your life and seeing every single brick was laid by your own hand. I heard through the grapevine, the same one that once carried whispers of his affair, that he's working a commission-based sales job, living in a studio apartment on the wrong side of the city. His mistress, the one he planned a future for, left him the moment the money and the status evaporated. It seems their great love couldn't survive the harsh reality of a 9-to-5 grind and stained carpet. The poetic justice was so perfect it almost felt scripted. His father still sits on my board. He sends me a card every Christmas, apologizing for the son he raised. There is no lingering bitterness between us, only the mutual respect of two business people who saved a company from a common threat. In a strange way, I gave him back his legacy, too. So, when I ask you, what would you have done in my place? I'm not asking if you would have screamed or cried. I'm asking if you would have had the cold, hard patience to let the pain turn into strategy. Would you have been able to swallow every insult, every lie, and let it fuel a plan so meticulous it felt like fate? Would you have traded the immediate, fleeting satisfaction of a confrontation for this slow, certain burn of total annihilation. My revenge was not a single moment in that boardroom. It is every morning I wake up in my own bed, in my own home, and brew my own coffee. It is every quarterly report that shows my company exceeding projections. It is the silence in my apartment that is no longer empty, but full of my own strength. He wanted to erase me, to replace me. Instead, he was the catalyst that forced me to become the most powerful version of myself. He thought he was leaving me behind. He never imagined he was launching me forward. The life I have now is not the one he tried to steal. It is better, it is honest, it is mine. And that is a victory no court document could ever fully capture. So I ask you again, looking at your own reflection, what would you truly be capable of?